The use of calcium sulfate as regenerative stimulus. Calcium sulfate has been used in orthopedic surgery for over 150 years and has found to be both safe and effective. I was introduced to calcium sulfate in the early 1990s by Dr. John Sotasani, who has published extensively on this product. Now let's talk about what is great about calcium sulfate. First of all, you want to use a medical grade Hemihydrate calcium sulfate. This stimulates the growth of blood vessels, angiogenesis, which speeds healing. As well, it stimulates osteoblasts and fibroblasts to speed healing as well. It resorbs in 3 to 6 weeks, but perhaps will even last even longer. And the original article in Dentistry was published about 1960. It's very compatible with bone regeneration. It's osteoconductive. It aids in infection control. And in bone grafting, it binds and acts as an adhesive to hold the bone particles together, making them much easier to handle, and is used as a barrier to prevent epithelial migration. And as I said earlier, has been used in orthopedic surgery for over 150 years. The company that you can contact to order this is the Carolina Biological Supply. But I would like to caution you that you cannot purchase this as an individual, but can be purchased by authorized schools and businesses. So I would suggest that you go to your local pharmacy and see if they can order it for you. You will note that a 500-gram bottle of this only costs less than $7, and that's a pound of the material, so that will last you a long time. So it is a very economic product to use. Now let's look at an actual case using the calcium sulfate. The anhydrous calcium sulfate has been placed in a dappen dish, and then we will use Collatape, and here's the product information sheet, and you will notice that a strip of this is 1 by 3 inches, and you will notice that the resorption rate on this is somewhere from 10 to 14 days. So if we take that piece that is 1 by 3 inches, we can usually cut that up into strips that are about 5 millimeters vertically, and you can get 4 or 5 strips out of one piece of Collatape. These are then mixed with the calcium sulfate so that the Collatape strips become embedded with the calcium sulfate. Now let's look at the case we're going to treat. This is a classic Class II recession. There is no attached or unattached gingiva on the facial of this, and it's about 5 millimeters of recession. And before using the technique that we're going to describe, I would not have considered using the coronal position flap. In my hands, I would be using a connective tissue graft. We're now ready to insert the Collatape into the tunnel technique, which was described by Allen in the early 1990s. So several strips have been inserted, and if you will look on the left, the biotype apical to the Collatape, and then the biotype thickened that we see after the insertion of 4 or 5 of these strips. A little more calcium sulfate is added, and then we're going to do the outbound inbound suturing technique, which has been described on many other videos on this web textbook. Unfortunately, a little of the Collatape was left exposed, and ideally I think that should have been covered up by the tissue. And I was concerned that this was going to have a negative impact on healing, and we would end up with less root coverage. But here we see it in a week, and you will see that we do have some root coverage, and it appears that there is a mucogingival junction apical to what appears to be keratinized tissue on that canine. We then see where the cemento-enamel junction is, and we do not have complete root coverage. We let it heal for another couple of weeks, and it appears that we have a mucogingival junction forming and also the appearance of a free gingival groove. but again, we do not have complete root coverage. And on the final healing, which is probably 4 to 6 weeks, we can see where the periodontal probe is, and that's the gingival margin, but we also see the cemento-enamel junction, and where we had about 5 millimeters of recession, we've got about 4 millimeters of root coverage, and we still have at least a millimeter of recession present. So now we look at the case preoperatively, and then we look at the case 15 months later, and lo and behold, it appears that we have nice keratinized tissue, 100% root coverage, and we did get the creeping attachment that we questioned on the earlier slide. So let's talk about the summary on this. First of all, I think that calcium sulfate appears to be the regenerative material, whereas the Collatape is a carrier and is used, as I have mentioned earlier, to obtain a thick biotype. The case I've presented is a proof in principle case, and many more cases need to be treated by many more different practitioners before this becomes an accepted surgical procedure. For those that you have watched the corona position flap, you will remember that there were 5 criteria. 2 of those was you need to have 3 millimeters of keratinized tissue vertically, and it needed to be a millimeter thick. This proof in principle case questions those 2 conclusions, and if they are not met, perhaps adding this technique to thicken the biotype and perhaps create more vertical height would prove to make the Coronally position flap an even more versatile technique.